Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's an amazing room and you guys look beautiful. It's an amazing thing for me to share a stage with people that I share a stage with. I need to do this, I'm sorry. Ensemble Studio, I still have goosebumps. I know you have kids, but adopt me, I'm in love, I'm sorry. Okay, we're gonna move to Havana now. I spent a couple of months in Havana in 2015, and I want to talk to you about a housing crisis that has not been successfully addressed for decades now, neither before nor after the revolution. The reality is that it's actually getting bigger. So I was researching this very complex and dynamically changing environment. We all know Cuba is changing. I myself was a witness to the reopening of the American embassy or opening of the first public hotspot ever on the island. But at the same time, Cuba is struggling with very many issues. And one of the most severe ones is the housing shortage. It's estimated that 1/3 of this country is awaiting housing. And housing in Cuba is considered a right. So, per se, there are no homeless people, or very little of them, but people are just pushed into already overcrowded houses, leading to very unhealthy living conditions and densities. The severeness of this situation is visible with, for example, people are trying to inhabit long abandoned ruins in an attempt of making it their home. Parallelly to this housing shortage, hotel shortage is also visible because of the rising touristic demand. And this is Havana Vieja, the place that I focused on. It's the oldest and the second densest housing district of the island, but it's also the most deteriorated one, with half of its buildings being threatened by collapse. It was recently flooded again, that's not going to help. But its biggest threat to the original character of the district is the touristic pressure that leads to a rapid gentrification of this area despite very restrictive Cuban laws. This leads to increased polarization within a society and may soon drive the original inhabitants of Havana Vieja to the outskirts of the city, cutting them off from the possibility of gaining from this very lucrative touristic boom that is taking place. As we see, as we know, as we hear, Cuba is changing. So Cuba needs to act now. Next 10, maybe 20 years will shape Cuba's inhabitants' future. So, in order to act now, I tried to figure out a way of addressing said issues with elements that exist in Cuba already. Cuba can't deal with the housing shortage simply because it doesn't have money to build or renovate houses. To the contrary, the hotel shortage does not suffer from financial issues, but is rightfully not allowed to grow freely, especially in Havana Vieja, as the impact of mass tourism can be very dangerous if invited on wrong terms. But I believe that one could imagine buildings in areas attracting tourists that would consist of both social housing for Cubans and a proportionate number of hotel units weaved into it. These hotel units will generate the money to pay for the loan taken for the construction of the building itself. Cuban inhabitants would take care for guests and at the same time make steady living. In some years, the demand for hotel units in Cuba will peak, then decline and stabilize. What would happen if Cuba was to build enough hotels to satisfy the peak demand? In 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of these buildings would be empty, obsolete. This is not a sustainable solution. In the model I put forward, hotel units are weaved into social housing in such a way that they're pre-designed to accommodate this dynamic by being able to merge and create new housing units after the demand is no longer there. It's also utilizing and building upon qualities of Cuba that are there already, like culture of cooperatives, new self-employed sector of the economy. Since 7 years ago, Cubans can move into self-employment, and a lot of them do it. Political reality, it's preferred that everybody gets a little instead of one group getting a lot. Experience of Office of the City Historian that pioneered the system of moving the touristic income into social investments. And finally, Casa Particular is quite famous now. And since 1997, Cubans can rent rooms in their houses for tourists. And it's not only a possibility of them gaining extra money, but also changes the relation between a tourist and a Cuban. Instead of being a hotel worker and a tourist, it's a host and a guest situation. Is this financially feasible? That's the bottom line of the whole project, probably. So with an assumption that we would balance 70 square meters of housing with 20 square meters of hotel unit, and with today's lowest prices for hotels in Havana Vieja, and with only 50% of the nights booked, where Havana Vieja now is booked for months, these kind of buildings will pay themselves off in around 7 years, while supplying 2 members of each family living in a building with wages 4 times greater than today's official average. There's a lot of empty plots in Havana. As I said, Havana Vieja is struggling with deterioration of a very big magnitude, and these buildings could address exactly these plots. So they would help to ease with the housing shortage and also rebuild the city at the same time. I'm also trying to introduce different ways of building, very inspired by today's speaker, Aravena. So architect is going to be responsible for designing all the permanent elements of the building, the structure, the front facade, circulation, technical shafts, and the national construction company is going to execute them for efficiency and quality of it. But then each future tenant is given a portion of a loan to execute their own apartment. We do it for multiple reasons, one is to include people in the project as soon as possible, 2, give them possibility of shaping their lived environment. But in Cuban context, there is one more thing that is very important. They will need to hire people to do that task. They will hire electricians, plumbers, maintenance workers, maybe interior designers even. And they will be people, those people that will be hired to do this will be from the emerging self-employed sector of the economy, most probably. And it will allow for the money from the big budget to trickle down to this emerging economy that needs stimulation, because it's going to be very important for the future of this country. To test this idea, I designed a set of prototypes in different shapes and sizes and urban setups. They all follow a set of guidelines. They put a lot of emphasis on natural ventilation, passive cooling methods. As I said, the hotel units are placed in a building in such a way that are pre-designed to later become housing units. There is an open ground floor and a roof terrace that is a shared space for both tourists and inhabitants of the building, with collective dining, leisure, laundry, and other activities. The front of the building is addressing small businesses, even street sellers, with dedicated infrastructure for them. Cubans love to socialize on the street. Due to the very crowded housing situation, they actually don't have any other choice. So all these prototypes are also trying to create a very vibrant relation between the Cuban streetscape and the open common ground floor of the building through the business zone in the front, through the colonnade. For example, a building could have 2 housing units, one on the top, one on the bottom, and 2 hotel units in the middle. And when the loan is paid off and then demand is no longer there, very easily, with almost no cost, we change this to a 3rd apartment, helping to ease the crisis further. Or families could buy these units and just expand their apartments as their family is growing. All those buildings come with multiplicity of plans, as the last decision is the decision of a future inhabitant, but the plans were just here to show the flexibility of those construction. And the bottom line is they all need to just maintain the proportion between hotel units and housing square meterage in order to be able to pay itself off in around 7 years. This is a development model, not an architectural one. Each building will need to be individually designed by an architect. In my professional opinion, these buildings should deeply respect the historic context of extraordinary environment as Havana Vieja is, and create architectural quality with honest material usage, ornamental Cuban handcraft, good proportion, and kind of blend in. So to finalize, I did not invent anything per se. All the elements exist already. But I think that's exactly what I wanted to do, because Cuba needs to act now. And in order to act now, we need to use what is there already. So I hope this new symbiotic relation between cooperative social housing and dispersed tourism could simply become a tool for inhabitants of Havana Vieja, but maybe even in Cape Town or Barcelona, to help inhabitants of such areas to deal with the negative impacts of gentrification that they are facing. Thank you. Thank you, Eva.